Hello, everybody, and welcome back to my channel. Thank you for joining me for another true crime video, and today we are continuing our series on the lives and crimes of Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, I've linked it in the description box, so head over there and watch it first, or this part probably won't make a lot of sense to you. In part 1, we spent a lot of time talking about Clyde as a child, his family life, his relocation from rural farm life to the big city of Dallas, Texas. We also discussed how Clyde always felt that he deserved more in the world than he had. And when he came to believe that he would never get the life he wanted in a legitimate way, he turned to illegal activity, as did many others in his West Dallas area. Today, we're going to meet Bonnie Parker, the ride or die, hopeless romantic who became the peanut butter to Clyde's jelly. And she was a very interesting person. Complicated and imperfect, introspective and troubled, but at the same time, she could be incredibly hopeful and optimistic, even in the face of desperation. So grab a cup of coffee or a snack or a whole-ass meal and join me for this story, won't you? First, before we dive in, we have to give a shout out to the people who pay the bills, and the sponsor of today's video is HelloFresh. Between preparing videos for YouTube and writing scripts for the podcast, I admittedly have very little free time on my hands, and when I do have free time, I want to spend it playing with the kids or playing Synthwriter on the VR. I don't want to be meal planning and meal prepping, and as much as I do love to cook, I want to cook when I want to cook, not like every day, right? And it used to be such a stressful part of my day to realize that it was getting close to that dinner hour and I had no idea of what I was going to make. I recorded a video today, I started editing it today, and it's currently 5:37 and there's no dinner in sight because I didn't make any because I was busy. Let's go. With HelloFresh, you can get mouth-watering seasonal recipes with fresh, pre-measured ingredients delivered right to your front door. HelloFresh cuts out stressful meal planning and prepping so you can enjoy cooking and get dinner on the table in just about 30 minutes or less. HelloFresh also not only saves you time, but money, since you can save up to 28% with HelloFresh versus shopping in the store, especially now, because it seems to me like everything has gotten so much more expensive in the grocery store. Am I the only one that feels this way? Let me know in the comments. I think I paid over $4 for a loaf of bread the other day. It was insane. And the fact that HelloFresh sends you pre-portioned ingredients also cuts down on waste, because I don't know how many times I'll buy a bag of potatoes, but then I'll only need like half of them or 5 of them, and then the next time I check, the potatoes are growing like new potatoes on them, and it's just, I'm not gonna eat those. Adam's taking forever, so I'm gonna pull the stuff out of the fridge and get my ingredients prepped. Now listen, Adam, what do you think is the most important first rule of cooking before you even start?
Wash your hands.
No, it's put up your hair. Best of all, HelloFresh is truly delicious. My husband and I not only love eating the meals, but we also love making them together. And when I say making them together, it's usually me being a disruption and him taking it far too seriously, which makes for a fun time. For me, at least.
You got your green onions.
Scallions.
You got your rice. Sour cream.
Sour cream. And carrots. Oh.
Cucumber?
Some big cucumbers, man.
White vinegar.
Oh, how adorable. They look like little bottles of tequila. Don't they? Mm-hmm. Like little mini bar bottles of tequila? HelloFresh has meals for everyone. Low calorie, vegetarian, family friendly, whatever your lifestyle is, they can accommodate it. And you can even add on dinners or extra proteins to your order for the week if you feel like you're going to be eating in more. Or if you're having guests over for dinner, using HelloFresh has made my life so much easier and my days way more stress-free, which I genuinely appreciate. And if you want to try HelloFresh out for yourself, go to HelloFresh.com and use my code stephanieharlowe10 to get 10 free meals meals, including free shipping. And this is a really great way to try HelloFresh out for yourself and see if it's something that fits into your life. Once again, go to HelloFresh.com and use code stephanieharlowe10 to get 10 free meals across your first 4 boxes and free shipping. Thank you to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video, and a big thanks to my husband for putting up with me. I feel like you don't even need me.
Oh, I do. What would I do without you?
All right, so I've got my chai latte that my husband brought back for me when he was done working. I've got my Taylor Swift sweater on, my cardigan. I love it. I'm ready to talk about Bonnie Parker, who I also think would have been a huge Taylor Swift fan. Bonnie Parker was born in the West Texas town of Rowena on October 1st, 1910. The first 4 years of her life seemed not only very normal, but also comfortable and happy for the most part. Rowena was a small but up-and-coming town on the railroad line, and it had originally been settled mainly by German and Czech cotton farmers from central Texas. Now, when I say it was a small town, I mean it was a very small town. In 1904, there were fewer than 100 people living there. By 1908, there was only 600, and within the next 22 years, that number would only grow by 200. Rowena was a place where most of the men were farmers, but Bonnie's father, Charles Parker, was a brick mason, a skilled laborer, and as a result, the Parker family was more well off than their neighbors, and this gave Emma Parker, Bonnie's mother, the impression that her family was sort of better than everyone else. Bonnie had a brother who was 2 years older than her. His name was Hubert, but everyone called him Buster, although I'm not quite sure why, because he's reported to have had a very serious and sober demeanor and not too much of a sense of humor. And Buster just sounds like a nickname for someone who doesn't take himself that seriously. You know, like a ball buster? Or do ball busters take themselves too seriously? Bonnie also had a younger sister who was born in 1913. Her name was Billie Jean, and she was not my lover. She's just a girl who thinks that I'm the one. Bonnie seemed to have both her mother and her father wrapped around her little finger in different ways from day one. And I think this was probably because of how much attention she always demanded, and also because of how cute and precocious she was. Her mother described her as a beautiful baby with cotton-colored curls, the bluest eyes you ever saw, and an impudent red mouth. From the moment she could walk, Bonnie demanded center stage, and she was constantly on the move, getting into trouble and keeping her entire family on their toes as they tried to keep her from breaking something or killing herself. From a young age, Bonnie felt most at home and most happy if she was the center of attention, whether it was negative or positive attention was less important to her. Every Sunday, her older brother Buster would walk her to Sunday school, and one day after they returned home, Buster walked in and he was pissed, and he told his mother that he was through with girls and someone else could handle Bonnie's religious education because his 3-year-old sister had done something outrageous that day. So this specific day in Sunday school, each of the younger children had been invited to get up on stage and perform a hymn. And Bonnie had clambered up on stage, really excited to be on stage to begin with because she loved it. Her yellow curls were bouncing, her blue eyes were lit up with excitement, and she proudly began to belt out an old ragtime song by Billy Murray called "He's a Devil in His Own Hometown," which was probably not a song approved by the Catholic Church, and it definitely wasn't a hymn.
He would never do in New York City, but in his hometown, he's a devil, he's a devil, he's a devil in his own hometown.
She thoroughly embarrassed her very serious and very somber 5-year-old brother and elicited a reaction from her audience that wasn't necessarily a positive or happy one, but it was a reaction after all. When Bonnie was 4 years old, her uncle taught her how to swear, which she enjoyed doing so much she decided to just start swearing at her father whenever possible, which he thought was just adorable. Emma Parker found it less adorable because it wasn't ladylike, and she claimed that she spanked her daughter with a hairbrush for her indiscretions, which makes me really sad to spank a 4-year-old with a hairbrush. This is drastic. And whether or not the uncle who taught the 4-year-old to swear was also spanked with a hairbrush is yet to be determined, but I'm going to say no. No, probably nothing happened to him. In 1914, Charles Parker unexpectedly passed away, leaving his wife alone with 3 young children and no idea of how she would care for them. Charles had always made a decent living on his own, and Emma had never had to work, but with him gone, they couldn't remain in their nice house or continue their comfortable lifestyles. So Emma, 6-year-old Buster, 4-year-old Bonnie, and 1-year-old Billie Jean picked up and moved to Cement City, Texas, to stay with Emma's parents, Frank and Mary Krause. Emma got a job working as a seamstress making overalls in a factory, and while she was away at work, Mary Krause tended to Emma's children, as well as Bonnie's cousin, Bess. Cement City was a small town in West Dallas created to support workers in the cement plants that were operated in the area, and it was very much a manufacturing city, full of industrial fumes and air pollution, cold, hard, and dirty. Emma's father and Bonnie's grandfather, Frank, had once been a farmer, but now he worked in a mill because people weren't being farmers that much anymore. And although the Krauses weren't much better off financially than Emma was, they took her and her 3 children in without a second thought, wanting to help her get back on her feet. Bonnie's parents had been devout Baptists, and they raised their children with these beliefs, and just because their circumstances had changed, it didn't mean that Emma was going to allow her children's religious education to suffer. So every Sunday, Emma dressed her kids in their best clothes, and they walked through the smog and the dust to attend church. When Emma was working and her children were being cared for by their grandmother, it was a full-time job for Mary Krause. Buster and Billie Jean were well behaved, but Bonnie and her cousin Bess, who became best friends as soon as they met, they kept their grandmother running and got into trouble constantly. Now, just saying these names for the first time, even though I've been researching this for weeks, I just realized that Buster, Billie Jean, Bess, and Bonnie all start with B. So I don't know what was going on with the Parker family and their, love of bees, but there you go. In the book Fugitives, Cousin Bess recalled that, quote, "Being with Bonnie was always more fun than other forms of amusement, and we were kindred spirits from the moment I laid eyes on her when she was 4 and came to live with grandmother." End quote. So these 2 girls got into all sorts of trouble, and we're going to go through some of these stories because they're hilarious, but they would have to wear winter underwear, long underwear during the cold months. And together, Bess and Bonnie decided that they didn't like to wear this underwear, so they were just not going to do it. But they knew that if, their mothers or their grandmother found out that they weren't wearing them, they'd get in trouble. So they came up with this plan to hide the underwear under their mattresses so no one would find out. Their grandmother also made them wear these bags of herbs around their neck to ward off diseases and evil spirits, and Bonnie and Bess hated wearing these little bags of herbs because they smelled so bad, so they came up with a plan to cut them off using butcher knives. Now, little Billie Jean, Bonnie's sister, she begged them to cut hers off too, but Billie Jean was Grandma's favorite, and Bess and Bonnie knew that if they did it, she would probably either tell on them accidentally or on purpose, so they usually left her out of most of their plans unless they needed her for something, and then they would use her for a distraction, typical like little sister, big sister behavior. And these little misbehavings would be nothing compared to what the cousins would do and get into as they got older. When Bonnie was 6, she started school at Cement City Elementary, and though she learned fast, always had the answers, and performed well academically, she was far from the teacher's pet because she was always up to something. She was mischievous, she was causing a ruckus, she was always just trying to make her classmates laugh and, acting out to get a reaction, and she enjoyed getting up in front of the class very much. So if they were reading out loud or reciting a poem, she always got up there and gave it her all because she really enjoyed any chance to show off. An elocution teacher came to Bonnie's class once a week, and for this teacher, Bonnie was the favorite because Bonnie was a natural-born actress and so cute and outgoing and endearing, and this teacher wasn't around her all week long, so she didn't have a chance to get annoyed by her, I guess. Now, Emma Parker, Bonnie's mother, said that this teacher loved Bonnie so much she would sometimes bring Bonnie to her apartment in Dallas for sleepovers, and then this teacher's grandfather would roll back the rugs on the floor, and he would spend hours on his hands and knees, like crawling around on the floor, pretending to be a horse or a steamship or whatever Bonnie wanted him to be. And I'm sure this is completely innocent, but Why in 2021 do I feel so weird about this whole situation? Like, could you imagine if your child's teacher was like, I'm just so in love with your 6-year-old daughter or your 7-year-old daughter. I want to bring her to my house and have her spend the night sometimes. Like, I think it's weird. Let me know in the comments what you think. I think it's weird. At the age of 7, local politicians who were running for office would bring Bonnie along with them to make speeches around election time because she was just so adorable and so quick-witted and so good at drawing a crowd and keeping their attention that everywhere she went, she would just draw these crowds and they'd stand around her and laugh and, say how cute she was. So the politicians were using her to, I guess, get supporters, get clout, just get people standing in front of them so they could give their politician spiel, which was probably all lies. Bonnie was also really great at imitations, and she would embarrass the people that she knew, like her family, her friends, because she would do these imitations and they were so spot on that the people she was doing them of were like, oh, this is awkward, but everybody else was laughing. So Bonnie was like, I know you're probably not too happy about this imitation, but look how happy everyone else is. So, we've got to sacrifice the one for the many. And as far as boys went, Bonnie was either beating them off with a stick or just beating them. Emma Parker said, quote, she was always in a scrap of some sort and would as soon jump on a boy twice her size as not, end quote. So one day there was a performance being put on for the parents of Cement City Elementary students, and Bonnie and one of her male classmates got into an argument about something right before they went on stage. So this little boy, during the performance, to get back at her, he pulled the hat off of her head, which was part of her costume, and Bonnie was so upset that he'd made her break character, she began to just lay into him on stage, yelling at him mid-performance, which made everyone in the audience just roar with laughter. They loved it. And when she heard them laughing, Bonnie quickly became not angry at this little boy. In fact, she just stopped paying attention to him at all. She gave all her attention to the audience and she put on a show. She was doing cartwheels and somersaults across the stage to further amuse her adoring public. When she was 10, a boy named Noel got on her bad side. And I don't know what he did to her, man. He did something to her. He said something to her. I don't know what it was. But after school, this girl, followed him home. And, he was walking home from school and she followed him. And she caught up to him in front of a drugstore. And as soon as she got close enough, Bonnie jumped on Noel like a spider monkey, right? With both her arms and legs wrapped around him. And it's reported that she had a little pocket knife or a razor blade or something on him, and she put it to his throat, and she said, if you ever cross me again, I will slice your throat. Noel was so terrified that he was basically in tears by the time a passing woman walked by and, had to pull Bonnie off of him. Despite all of this, Bonnie was always very popular with the boys, and she encouraged and enjoyed the attention. Her cousin Bess remembered that Bonnie always would have a bag full of candy bars and chewing gum and little snacks and treats and gifts that had been given to her by love-struck boys. When she wasn't making a scene in school or threatening to cut her classmate's throat in front of the town drugstore, Bonnie was working on becoming famous. And what was she going to become famous for? It really didn't matter because she would just say to herself, I'm going to become famous. I'm good at everything. People love me, so that means I'm going to become famous. So whether she was an actress, a singer, a writer, or anything, really, it didn't matter what she did as long as she was famous because that made her happy. To be seen, to be heard, to be adored, to be applauded. She loved it. She and her cousin Bess one day decided they wanted to be opera singers. So every evening as the sun was going down, they would climb on top of the pig pen at their grandparents' house and they would lift their heads into the sky, singing at the top of their lungs. When Bonnie and Bess were younger, they imagined one day that they would become world-famous circus performers. So they would often go into the old barn behind their grandparents' house. They would climb up into the loft and skin the cat on the rafters, 20 feet above the ground. And if you don't know what skin the cat is, I guess it was a circus term, but it's also a term used in gymnastics. I'll put a little video of someone doing it here so you can get an idea of what exactly it was that they were doing. Bess said, quote, "Of course, we were constantly in danger of falling and breaking our fool necks, but that idea never occurred to us." End quote. So they were doing this for a while, and then an aunt who lived nearby saw them doing it one day, and she went inside and told their grandparents, and she was like, "This is dangerous for these young girls. Like, what are you guys not watching them?" You know how parents back in the day would just guilt each other and make each other feel like they weren't doing a good enough job. They still do that, don't they? So Frank and Mary Krause promptly put a stop to their dangerous circus routine, and they basically told Bonnie and Bess, like, you're not allowed to even step foot into that barn again. And the front door of the barn faced the house and faced like the kitchen window, which is where Mary Krause spent most of her time. So they couldn't really go through the front door if they wanted to go into the barn, because then they would be spotted either by Mary or Frank Krause or this nosy aunt who lived nearby. So Bonnie was like, we're going to still do this. We just got to find a way. Where there's a will, there's a way. So she led Bess to a hole that was like in the side of the barn, behind the barn, and then they just sneaked through that hole and continued skinning the cat on the rafters. Now, I don't know if this was a hole in the wood or like a hole in the ground, like little animals make to burrow. I'm probably betting it was a hole in the barn, not the ground, now that I think about it, because when I pictured this happening in my head, which is what I do, I imagined it being a hole in the dirt and they would just like crawl through it. But now that I think about it and I'm telling you the story, that seems less realistic, but this is not a detail that matters, so let's move on. Bess and Bonnie also came up with this fun little game where they built a sort of like fort or structure out of feed bags, and feed bags are just usually like canvas bags or something, and they have animal feed in them. And the main purpose of this structure was to hide them from sight as they built fires and roasted potatoes that they'd stolen from their grandmother's pantry. Now, eventually, Mary Krause noticed that the potatoes were going missing from the pantry, and she suspected that it was the work of her two rebellious granddaughters, so she would watch them like a hawk every time they were near the kitchen or came in the kitchen. So the girls had to come up with a plan. They would enlist little Billie Jean to help them with their potato caper. She would be sent in to distract their grandmother and get Mary out of the kitchen, and while Mary's back was turned, Bonnie and Bess would raid the pantry. And this all went according to plan, and it was going swimmingly until one day they were in their little feed sack fort roasting potatoes, and they heard their grandmother calling them from the house. So they ran to the house to see what she wanted because they didn't want her to come out and see what they were doing. And they left the fire going, and within no time, it was blazing out of control. It burned through the feed sacks. It had spread to the back fence. It was bad. Bess remembered they got in some big trouble for this, saying, quote, "When the fire was out, the paddling we did get. We ate standing up for a week," end quote. Another time, Bess and Bonnie were sent to the store to pick up their grandfather's snuff. And for those of you who don't know, snuff is a smokeless tobacco. It's usually made from like a ground or pulverized tobacco leaves. It's like a powder sort of, and it's used by the person who's using it. They would basically inhale this stuff into their nose. Well, the girls knew that their grandfather loved it, right? So they decided that they were going to try it. And Bess went first, claiming that it, quote, "worked swell. I was practically a new creature in minutes," end quote. So Bonnie decided that she wasn't going to try the snuff after all. I don't know if it was because she saw her cousin just like bouncing off the walls after she tried it, but Bonnie did try something else. When Bess and Bonnie stumbled upon their grandfather's wine in the hayloft, she did partake in that, and she drank quite a bit, to the point where she passed out, scaring Bess, who said, quote, "The next thing I knew, there she lay, as blue around the mouth as if she'd been eating bluing and saying nothing," end quote. So seeing her cousin like unresponsive and blue, Bess rushed out to the well to get some cold water to pour over Bonnie in hopes of waking her up, and she eventually did wake up. I think it took like 3 or 4 like barrels of water. And everyone was so scared about what happened, because basically Bonnie almost died, that the girls did not get spanked, but Grandpa did move his wine. Probably a smart move, because I bet you that those girls would have tried that wine again. And you wouldn't know it from seeing Bonnie in pictures later, But she also had a fear of guns from a young age. It was Bonnie and Bess's job, or one of their jobs in the morning, to go around the house and make everybody's beds. And their grandfather kept a pistol under his pillow that Bonnie refused to touch. So whenever they were making their grandfather's bed, Bonnie would make Bess handle her grandfather's side of the bed because she was scared of the gun that they knew was under his pillow. And once she accidentally brushed up against the gun under the pillow, and Bess said she screamed as if a snake had bit her. On the weekends, all the cousins would go out fishing, which was something little Billie Jean really enjoyed as she got older, since she was a fairly quiet and nice child. But Bonnie found fishing incredibly boring, and as Billie Jean was trying to fish and, catch something, her older sister would just dance around on the banks, singing as loudly as she could. Her favorite things to sing were anything in the top 40, current hits. So Billie Jean would shush her and be like, shut the hell up. I can't catch fish if you're screaming like this. I'm sure Billie Jean didn't say that, but that's what I would have said. And when Billie Jean said this to her, Bonnie told Billie Jean, when I'm on Broadway and have my name in lights, you'll be sorry you talked to me this way. So she had some high aspirations and a high opinion of herself from a very young age, which I don't think in itself is detrimental. I think children should have a very high opinion of themselves, and I think it's a positive thing for small children to have these dreams and aspirations and truly believe that they can achieve those things. But as you get older, there's a point where you would reach reality, and be like, okay, I wanted to be a famous writer, but I can't write. Or I wanted to be a famous singer, but I can't carry a tune. So let me figure out something I'm good at and then, work on that. And this just never happened for Bonnie. And I'm not saying she wasn't a good writer. She was actually a really good writer. Or that she wasn't a good singer. I don't know if she was a good singer, but people seem to enjoy hearing her sing, so I would expect that she was. But we also have to remember this is 1920s Cement City, Texas. No talent scouts were, prowling the streets of Cement City for the next big thing. That was all happening in New York and LA and things like that. And Bonnie was never really honest with herself about her circumstances either, right? She didn't have money. She also had no way of making money, at least not the kind of money she would need to pick up and move to someplace like Los Angeles or New York. I mean, she probably could find enough money to pick up and move there, but not stay there for very long. But Bonnie never really gave up on this dream, this becoming famous dream, all through her admittedly short life. And as Bonnie got older, this outlandish persona would become a part of who she was, and she became very interested in clothes and fashion. She paid attention to the big city trends. She would follow the newest hem lengths, the newest makeup techniques, and she was known to go pretty heavy-handed with the makeup, mimicking the looks of the women she saw on the big screen. Because just like Clyde, Bonnie enjoyed going to the movies, probably more than anything else. Outside of the movie theater, she was just a girl in Cement City who would probably end up married with 3 children by the time she was 21. But inside that theater, while she sat enveloped in the velvety darkness for an hour or two and gazed up at the screen, there was still that hope that she could be anyone and do anything, just like these women she saw on the screen. I read on one of the websites that she actually paid money at one point when she was still very young, I think 14 or 15, to go into Dallas and pay a professional photographer to take a picture of her, because typically back then young girls would go and get their pictures taken in the photo booths, at the festivals or fairs and things. But not Bonnie, because she was better than that. She was kind of the 1920s version of I'm not like other girls. And although she had plenty of male admirers, Bonnie didn't have her first real boyfriend until she was 15. Roy Thornton was tall, dark, and handsome. He looked as if he could have just stepped off one of those movie screens. Bonnie immediately fell in love with him, or what she thought was love. He was a lot of fun. He complimented her. He made her laugh. He took her out on dates, and he always paid. And as a 15-year-old girl, Bonnie could imagine that being married to Roy would be just like dating him. It could always be like this, going out on the town with a handsome, charming man on her arm, being young and beautiful and newly in love. Things would never change. Other marriages she saw around her fell apart. Other couples and married couples she saw fell out of love and the thrill was gone, but not her and Roy, because they were star-crossed. They were meant to be. So she married him the next year when she was 16. At first, her mother, Emma, refused to give her permission for this, but Bonnie was insistent that Roy was the one, and he was perfect, and she wouldn't listen to anything negative anyone had to say about him. Bonnie actually got a tattoo of 2 red hearts labeled Bonnie and Roy, and the 2 red hearts were connected by arrows to symbolize their undying love. And they got married on September 25th, 1926, just a week before her 16th birthday. So, I mean, technically she married him when she was 15, but she was almost 16. Either way, it's like super young, right? Now, from the moment she was born, Bonnie had loved her mother, Emma, very much. And after her father died and they moved and Emma had to start going to work, the transition was a little hard for Bonnie, not being able to see Emma as often. Emma went to work very early in the morning, and when Bonnie woke up, she would go in and clean up her mother's room without being asked to. This wasn't part of her chores. She just wanted to do something nice for her mother. She would gather the clothes that had been tossed on the floor, and she would fold them neatly. She would lay out her mother's slippers. She'd take Emma's house dress and, hang it up lovingly, stroking it as if her mother was inside the dress. And all the time she was doing this, she would talk to these items, the slippers, the clothes, and sort of like stroke them and just speak softly and calmly as if she was comforting a fussy baby. So when Bonnie got married and was expected to leave home and move in with her new husband, this was another tough transition for her because she'd never been away from her mother for even a night. So she and Roy ended up moving into a little house only 2 blocks away. And every night, Bonnie would insist that Roy escort her over to visit with her mother for hours. When Bonnie wasn't at Emma's, she was insisting that her mother spend the night at her house. Because of this, Bonnie and Roy didn't have much of a honeymoon period, which apparently was like this running joke in the Parker family. I'm sure Roy wasn't as amused. So one snowy night shortly after they got married, Bonnie was sick and in bed, so Roy refused to bring her out in the snow to visit Emma. Around midnight, Bonnie woke up crying, saying she'd had this bad dream that something was wrong with her mother. So she basically forced Roy to go outside in the middle of a blizzard and walk 2 blocks to Emma's place so that he could make sure she was okay. Emma was actually feeling sick herself and in bed, so when Roy said he was there to bring her back to his house, Emma informed him, I don't feel good enough to walk that far. In response, Roy said, well, I'll just wrap you up and carry you down there, Mama, because I might as well not go home without you. Bonnie wouldn't let me in. After a month of this, Emma told Bonnie and Roy that if this was going to continue, they might as well all just move in together to save everyone a lot of trouble and time, and so they did, renting a house on Olive Street in Dallas. After just a few months of being in Dallas, Roy started acting differently. He would leave home and not come back all day. Eventually, he started staying out nights, and then he'd be gone for days at a time, not telling Bonnie that he was leaving, where he was going, or when he was coming back. In August of 1927, Roy was gone for 10 days, and the whole time Bonnie was this complete mess. When Roy stayed away for 19 days in October, Emma brought up the idea of a divorce, but Bonnie flat out refused. She still had hope that her storybook romance would prevail. But in December, when Roy disappeared again, Bonnie had to face the fact that her husband probably had another woman who was keeping him warm on the nights that he was away from his marital bed. Bonnie began keeping a diary around this time, and in it, she goes from missing Roy to hating him to dark and crushing thoughts that she might never see him again, and then back through those emotions. On January 1st, 1928, 17-year-old Bonnie wrote, "Before opening this year's diary, I wish to tell you that I have a roaming husband with a roaming mind. We are separated again for the 3rd and last time. The first time, August 9/19, 1927. The second time, October 1/19, 1927, and the third time, December 5th, 1927. I love him very much and miss him terribly, but I intend doing my duty. I am not going to take him back. I am running around with Rosa Mary Judy, and she is somewhat a consultation to me." So I don't know if she meant to say consultation or if she meant consolation, but she wrote consultation, maybe both. Bonnie continued in her diary to say, "We have resolved this New Year's to take no men or nothing seriously. Let all men go to hell, but we are not going to sit back and let the world sweep us by." So I believe she actually wrote that entry on New Year's Eve, even though it's dated January 1st, because later she makes another entry dated January 1st, midnight, and says, "The bells are ringing. The old year has gone, and my heart has gone with it. I have been the happiest and most miserable woman this last year. I wish my old year would have taken my past with it. I mean, all my memories. But I can't forget Roy. I'm very blue tonight. No word from him. I feel he has gone for good. This is New Year's Day, January 1st. I went to a show, saw Ken Maynard in the Overland stage. I'm very blue. Well, I must confess, this New Year's night I got drunk trying to forget, drowning my sorrows in bottled hell." And her diary goes on much like this. She does have a flair for creative writing. She has a flair for the dramatic. She talks a lot about going to see movies with Rosa. She even goes on dates with some young men, but mostly she just stayed home and wrote about how much she missed Roy and how she didn't want to go out on dates because it just made her realize how much she missed Roy and wonder if he was ever going to come back because she loved him and she wanted him to come back so they could make it work. On January 3rd, realizing that her husband might never come back, Bonnie goes out looking for a job, and she wrote, "Searched this damn town over for a job today. I guess luck is against me. Haven't heard a word from Roy. I wonder where he can be. Diary, every night I look at his dear little pictures. That's all I have of him. I don't suppose he wants me to know where he is. He doesn't love me anymore. Where is my wandering boy tonight? I am fully discouraged, for I know I can never live with him again. I hunted up Reba Griffin today just to know that she is not with him. She has taken my place in his heart, but she will never take my place by his side. I am going to bed as it is 10:30. I wonder what tomorrow will bring." So this Reba person, apparently Bonnie thought that Reba and Roy were having an affair and that when Roy wasn't with Bonnie, he was with Reba, and that could have been true. I don't know what evidence she had, what receipts she had, but that could have been true. But this time when Bonnie went searching for Roy, he wasn't with Reba. And I think it's important to note the way Bonnie is with Roy, almost obsessive, as if she can't even consider a life without him. And this is exactly the same way she would later be with Clyde Barrow. Bonnie was supposedly incredibly loyal once she decided to love someone, but I do want to point out that once she was done with Roy, she was done. And I believe that given the time and distance from Clyde, the same pattern would have most likely repeated itself. Or maybe not. Maybe Bonnie and Clyde were actually soulmates, star-crossed lovers, the Romeo and Juliet of the 21st century. Who knows? On January 7th, Bonnie wrote in her diary, "Well, I went downtown today and saw a picture. Milton Sills in framed. Sure was a good picture. Rosa Mary has been ill, but is okay now. Today I went with Lewis again. Not a darn thing to do. I met Johnny Baker tonight for the first time in a long time. Still the same old Johnny, but I don't care anything about him. Roy is always in my mind. I came home early tonight. I didn't feel like going anywhere much. Johnny came out with Lou. Oh God, how I wish I could see Roy. But I try my best to brush all thought of him aside and have a good time. If I knew for sure he didn't care for me, I'd cut my throat and say, here goes nothing. Maybe he does, though. I still have hopes. Raymond called me. I have a date with him for tomorrow, but to hell with all men. He's very nice, a perfect gentleman, but how can I enjoy life? Raymond is a detective. I think I'll have him look Roy up. Gracie wants me to come down there, but I can't bear to look at his sisters. They remind me of him. I love them because they are his. I took the blues when I went to see May. Well, maybe tomorrow will make things a little clearer." So when she's talking about May and Gracie, these are family members of Roy, and she did for some time spend a lot of time with them after he went missing, or during his stints where he wasn't there. She was very close to them. She loved them. But as time went on, seeing them and being around them just made her remember that Roy wasn't with her. And the next day didn't make things any clearer for Bonnie, who wrote that there was plenty to do, but no heart to do it. The next day, January 9th, Bonnie wrote that she'd been torn up all day, that she went job hunting but didn't find a job, and that Roy still hadn't called. She ended the entry saying, I guess I'm a fool to look for any word from him, but I don't want to lose hopes any worse. On January 11th, Bonnie wrote that she still had no job and asked in her diary, quote, "Why don't something happen?" End quote. And when she's asking why doesn't something happen, she means anything, a call from Roy or a job or some excitement, something that makes her feel like life's worth living again. 2 days later, Bonnie wrote, "Went to a show, saw Virginia Valley in Marriage. Not a thing helps out though. Sure am blue. Everything has gone wrong today. Why don't something happen? What a life." Her final entry on January 16th simply ended with, "Sure am blue tonight. Have been crying. I wish I could see Roy." Bonnie most likely abandoned her diary after this point for 2 reasons. One, as she kept mentioning, nothing was happening and her entries would become shorter and shorter and sadder as the month of January went on. And 2, because she finally did find a job waitressing at Hargrave's Cafe on Swiss Avenue in Dallas, and she did well here. She was pretty and bright, she could make good conversation with her customers, she was smart, and she received decent tips. In his book, Go Down Together, Jeff Gwynne states that there's a possibility that Bonnie engaged in prostitution on the side to make some extra pocket money, and while of course that's possible, as most things are, there's absolutely no evidence that I could find to suggest this was the case besides him writing that in his book. I don't know if he has, inside information that just nobody else on the internet has. That's possible, but there is no evidence of it. Now, it seems that many years later, while she was in jail for something, Bonnie wrote a poem called The Prostitute's Convention. So I guess Jeff Gwynne thought that she wrote that because she was a prostitute, and she goes really in depth in this poem about all the different women of the night and what their names were and their personalities, and it's actually really good. But, Bonnie was creative and a dramatic sort of person. So her writing this poem is not concrete proof of anything. It could be completely fictional, just something she came up with in her head and thought it was a cool, fun idea and ran with it. At the end of January 1929, Roy returned home. But this dude's literally been gone for like 2 months. And when he tried to pick back up with Bonnie as if nothing had happened, she firmly and clearly let him know that it was over. She'd been on her own for some time now. She was making her own money. And to put it simply, she'd grown up a little bit. And it was only a few months after this, when Bonnie ended things for good, that Roy was arrested for burglary and sentenced to 5 years in prison. But still, Bonnie did not ask him for a divorce, telling her mother, quote, "Well, I didn't get it before Roy was sent up, and it looks sort of dirty to file for one now. Besides, I don't want to marry anyone else, so I'll just wait, Mama." End quote. And I mean, I respect that about Bonnie, right? She doesn't want to kick a guy when he's down. Okay, that's her choice. But just like the Roy and Bonnie heart tattoo, their marriage was permanent, and Bonnie Parker would die Roy Thornton's wife, even if only in name. Soon after this, Bonnie got a new job at Marco's Cafe, which is in downtown Dallas near the courthouse, better customer base, more money. And because of its proximity, some of Bonnie's regular customers were police officers and judges, the very same people who would one day be clamoring to put her in prison and throw away the key. And Emma Parker commented on this in the book, saying, quote, "Ironically enough, she met and became friends with many officials and officers of the city, county, and state who were destined by fate to spend 2 years tracking her to her death." End quote. I think I can see where Bonnie gets her flair for the dramatic. Emma Parker kind of writes in the same way, destined by fate. Like, no, they weren't destined by fate. Bonnie became an outlaw and a criminal. And then these public officials whose job it was to, take care of outlaws and criminals, they had to do their job. It's not fate. The manager of Marco's Cafe, he really liked Bonnie, but he told her mother that she was too charitable and she'd spend a good amount of her paycheck buying lunch for those who couldn't afford to buy it for themselves. Apparently, after she did this a couple of times, word got out and every down-on-their-luck man, woman, and child was showing up at Marco's Cafe looking for a free lunch. And the manager of Marco's was afraid that Bonnie was being taken advantage of, and he really didn't like this kind of attention. Emma Parker said, quote, "Money never did mean anything to her. She'd either give it to me or to somebody with a hard luck story. She actually wouldn't buy herself enough clothes, and I'd have to go down and do her shopping when she became ragged. As long as she worked for Marco's, she fed people." End quote. Marco's went out of business in November of 1929, and I know the way I arranged that sentence kind of made it seem like they went out of business because Bonnie was giving away free lunches, but it was actually due to the stock market crash, which affected and closed many small businesses around the United States. Bonnie now had no job, no husband, and no prospects. She lived with her mother, Emma, her little sister, Billie Jean, who was now all grown up and had a husband named Fred Mace. Fred also lived with them, and Fred and Billie Jean's newborn baby daughter lived there too. Bonnie worked small jobs here and there to contribute to the household. She cleaned houses and she babysat, which was her favorite, babysitting, because she loved babies and had always wanted to have children of her own, but for some undetermined reason, she was unable to get pregnant. There's a bunch of speculations out there of why she couldn't get pregnant, but I personally feel uncomfortable speculating about why a woman was unable to have children when she wanted to have children. I don't know, it just doesn't feel right, so just for some reason she couldn't have kids. But many years later, Clyde would jokingly tell Emma Parker that holdups had never been Bonnie's favorite thing to do, but if they had been into kidnapping, she would have thrived, especially if the people being snatched had been 1 year old or younger. Clyde said that no matter where they went, Bonnie would approach mothers with their babies and ask to hold the babies, even sometimes asking if she could borrow the baby for a night or two. One day while Bonnie was still living with her mother, Emma came home from work to find her house filled with babies of all different ages, sizes, and colors, and Bonnie was right in the middle of them, glowing with happiness, and she told her mother, I decided to throw a party for the neighborhood children, and look, everybody came, and there was cake and candy, and the house was a mess. And Emma was like, okay, but I can't even walk in my house right now, so you gotta send all these babies back to where they belong. And I guess it took quite a while for Bonnie to track down where all the babies and children went to. So right before Bonnie met Clyde, this is where she was, sort of drifting through life. But she was still young, she still had her looks and her energy, and most of all, her dreams. The dreams that got her through all the bad stuff and the disappointments, because there was never a doubt in her mind that one day she was going to be somebody that everyone took notice of. But I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that I don't think Bonnie sort of took a blow to her self-esteem after the whole situation with Roy. I mean, how could you not? And so I believe she was a little bit susceptible at this point to meet somebody and fall in love again, as long as that person was kind of right and checked her boxes. Now, there's different variations of how Bonnie met Clyde. Some are more believable than others, but there's two that are the most possible. Emma Parker says that Bonnie had a friend in West Dallas. This friend had broken her arm, so Bonnie went to stay with her friend so that she could help her out while she was, out of commission with a broken arm. Now, Clyde's parents lived nearby, and apparently Clyde knew this friend of Bonnie's, so he stopped and paid a visit to the girl. And that's when Bonnie met Clyde. Now, Jeff Gwynne paints a slightly different picture, claiming that Bonnie's older brother, Buster, had gotten married to Clarence Clay's sister, and they were having a housewarming party, which obviously Bonnie attended because it was her brother. And then Clyde was a guest of Clarence's. Both could be true. Neither could be true. I don't think it matters so much where they were as what happened when they laid eyes on each other. Clyde thought Bonnie was just perfect with her blonde curls and bright blue eyes. He also liked how short she was because he felt that he was short for a man, and he'd always been really self-conscious of that. So Bonnie being so tiny and short, it made him feel bigger and more masculine. And Bonnie was charming when she wanted to be, and she knew how to make a man feel like a man. She would clutch onto his arm and gaze up at him adoringly, hanging on every word he said, laughing at every joke he made as if he was truly the leading man in the movie of their love story. From the moment they met, there was an instant and mutual connection. Clyde liked to be in control, steering the ship. He liked to feel like a man, and Bonnie liked to let him do that. She liked to feel, like this little girl, and that she was being protected by this strong, handsome man. Like I said, I think what happened with Roy, and just in general, how sad she'd been for a long time, and how, she'd felt hopeless for a long time. I think it took maybe a little bit out of her sails. And when Bonnie felt like she was just an old cardigan under someone's bed, Clyde put her on and said she was his favorite. I'm sorry, I couldn't help it. I'm done talking about Taylor Swift, at least for the next 30 minutes. Clyde was handsome, he was a sharp dresser, he was clean cut, he smelled good because he, took very good care of himself, he had a nice car, and he made her feel pretty and desired, but most importantly, he was fun and spontaneous. When she was with him, she knew that anything could happen. She knew at least something would happen, which is what she had been begging for in her diary. These were two people cut from the same cloth. in my opinion, and they recognized that in each other. They both wanted more from life, and they refused to accept their current dire circumstances. They both had grown up feeling that life owed them more than what they'd been given. The first time Emma Parker met Clyde Barrow was the second week of January when she stopped by to see Bonnie at this friend's house. Emma said Clyde was in the kitchen with an apron on mixing up some hot chocolate, which was apparently his favorite drink. Same. Emma said, quote, "I knew there was something between them the moment Bonnie introduced him to me. I could tell it in Bonnie's eyes and her voice and the way she kept touching his sleeve as she talked. I knew, too, that it was different from the young girl love she had given Roy. She was desperately afraid I wasn't going to like this Barrow boy, and she wanted me to like him above everything else." End quote. Emma said that Clyde was a likable boy with dark wavy hair, dancing brown eyes, and a dimple that popped out now and again when he smiled. She said, quote, "He looked more like a young law student or doctor than a bandit. He had what they call charm, I think. He was good company and full of fun, always laughing and joking. I could see why Bonnie liked him." End quote. Now, Emma swears up and down that at this point, Bonnie had no idea Clyde was living on the wrong side of the law, basically in hiding, right, since the November issue with him and his brother, where his brother got arrested and put in prison. But just as Blanche Calloway would soon have her eyes opened to Buck's illegal activity, Bonnie wouldn't be in the dark for too much longer. The first week of February, Clyde decided he needed to go out of town for a bit. Some reports say that he was headed out to, kind of wait for the heat on him to dissipate in Dallas because he was wanted. Others say he was in the middle of another car thief escapade, so he was planning on stealing another car and selling it in some small town. Either way, he was leaving Dallas for a bit, so he paid Bonnie a visit at her house to say goodbye. He and Bonnie sat on the couch and, they stared into each other's eyes and argued over who loved who more for so long that Emma eventually was just like, "Do you want to just, crash on the couch tonight? Because it's getting late. It's like nighttime. So you either have to leave or you guys have to go to bed." According to Emma, it never occurred to her that he might be leaving town because he was in trouble. And if she'd known that, she would have sent him away immediately. But she didn't send him away because she didn't know that. And when the police arrived to arrest him at Bonnie's house the next morning, he was still snoozing away on the Parker's couch wearing a pair of Buster's old pajamas. Now, this was the Dallas police, right? They did have, I think, a little vendetta against him, and they were familiar with Clyde and his brother Buck, as well as their activity. They had a reputation. So one of the first things one of the cops said to Clyde was, "If you've got any rabbit in you, you'll run like Buck." And Clyde, who, at least in the beginning, never seemed to be fazed by anything, he replied with his bedhead and a boyish smile, and he said, "Buddy, I'd sure run if I could." So Emma asked the police officers, why is this kid being arrested? And they informed her that he was wanted in other cities for car theft and burglaries and stuff, but he was going to be held in the Dallas jail until those other jurisdictions could arrange for his transfer. Clyde remained calm, and he allowed himself to be cuffed while Bonnie screamed and cried. She hit the walls with her fists. She begged the police officers, don't take him away. She clung onto Clyde as he was being, pulled out of the house. And he just, softly comforted her and told her, "It's all going to be okay. Don't worry. Come visit me. We'll talk this out." And then after he was gone, Bonnie sat still and quiet for a long time with silent tears streaming down her cheeks. So even though Emma Parker had been introduced to Clyde, and they'd met a few times, Clyde had not yet brought Bonnie out to the campground to meet his family because he knew that his mother would really not approve of Bonnie and her heavy makeup and modern ways. And Bonnie was really bubbly and really outgoing. She wasn't reserved at all. And Clyde really did like her, so he didn't kind of want to have his two worlds collide yet. But once Clyde was in jail, Bonnie needed to retain her connection to him somehow. And she did this by going over to the Barrow house herself and introducing herself to his mother and father and siblings. She felt that being with his family was the closest thing that she had right now to being with him, and at this point they had a common goal, which was basically worrying about Clyde and his future if these charges stuck. Bonnie really liked Clyde's sister Nell. They got along very well, and Clyde's little sister Marie, who was just 11 at that time, thought Bonnie was just so cute and sweet and, kind of really admired her and looked up to her. But Clyde's mother, Cumi, surprisingly was not a Bonnie Parker fan right from the start, and she wrote in her unpublished autobiography, which I can't even find a full copy of, it's just little bits and pieces here, but Cumi said Bonnie just cared for a good time and spending money as she went. But Cumi said that about like every single person that Clyde brought home. So I also think that at this point, Cumi loved Blanche, Buck's wife, so much. Blanche was, the perfect, proper, polite daughter of a preacher. She was the perfect daughter-in-law, and, nobody else could stack up to that. As often as she could, Bonnie would visit Clyde in the Dallas jail, and she wrote to him every single day, sending letters filled with words of love, encouragement, and support. Bonnie was certainly a stand-by-your-man type of girl, even when, or especially when, that man was behind bars. She felt that Clyde needed her now more than ever. She'd finally found this love, the kind they write songs and make movies about, and she wasn't going to let something small and inconsequential like a bunch of criminal charges get in the way of that, because Bonnie was sure that Clyde was the one, and there would never be another great love like him again. And this is illustrated in her letters to him. On Valentine's Day 1930, Bonnie wrote to Clyde saying, quote, "Sugar, just a line tonight. How is my baby by now? Today has been just another day to me and a hard one. Sure wish I could have seen you today. I think I could have made it. Maybe I can see you tomorrow. I went out to your mother's today. Maria's staying all night with me tonight. Sugar, when'd you get out? I want you to go to work, and for God's sake, don't get into any more trouble. I'm almost worried to death about this. Sugar, when you get clear and don't have to run, we can have some fun. I just called Nell, and she said she saw you today. I sure do like her. She's so sweet. Darling, today is the first day I've cried in a long time, but I sure did cry today all day. One of the boys brought me a box of candy for a Valentine today. I was alone with the baby, and the idiot tried to spend the day. I never was so irritated in all my life. Talk about a sick woman, but I was the sickest. I did everything but tell him to leave, and he stayed and stayed and stayed. Finally, Billy came back and I walked out. Now it's bad enough to be sick and discouraged as I was without having an idiot to put up with. I felt like throwing the candy in his face. I didn't appreciate the old candy at all. And I thought about my darling in that mean old jail and started to bring the candy to you. Then I knew you wouldn't want the candy that old fool brought me. So the baby she was with was not her baby. It was Billie Jean's baby, her sister's baby. And when she says that Marie was spending the night with her, after Bonnie introduced herself to the Barrow family, Marie would come and spend a lot of nights with Bonnie at her mother's house. So she really preferred being there because it had running water and electricity and a phone and stuff. Marie really got a kick out of that. Bonnie continues and writes, "Honey, I sure wish I was with you tonight. Don't you wish we could be together? Sugar, I never knew I really cared for you until you got in jail. And honey, if you get out okay, please don't ever do anything to get locked up again. If you ever do, I'll get me a railroad ticket 50 miles long and let them tear off an inch every 1,000 miles. Because I never did want to love you, and I didn't even try. You just made me. Now I don't know what to do. And listen, honey boy, you started this, and somebody is sure gonna finish it." At one point in February, Bonnie did drive out to the Dallas jail to visit Clyde, and she was told he wasn't there. He'd already gotten moved. She wrote him a letter saying, quote, "I didn't even know you'd gone till I borrowed the car and went downtown, and they told me you went away last night. I was so blue and mad and discouraged. I had to cry. I had Maybelline on my eyes, and it began to stream down my face, and I had to stop on Lamar Street. I laid my head down on the steering wheel and sure did boo-hoo. A couple of city policemen came up and wanted to know my trouble. I imagine I sure looked funny with Maybelline streaming down my face. Well, anyhow, I told them I merely felt bad and they offered to drive me home, but I thanked them and dried my eyes and went on out to your mother's. They weren't at home. I came back to town and couldn't find Mother, so I went out to Bess's and couldn't find her. By that time, I was on the verge of hanging myself, so I tried to wreck the damn car, but I didn't succeed, and came on home and walked to the floor till now. Your mother and Dad came out a few minutes ago. So tomorrow I'm going to make an effort to see you. If I drive all the way to Denton and still don't get to see you, it's going to be a jam up for somebody because I'm sure going to be hard to get along with." So Clyde had been sent to Denton to face charges for robbery from November the 29th, and that was the time that Clyde and Buck had broken into the auto body shop and stolen the safe and then drove the safe away in a stolen car and then led the police on a chase, which eventually turned into Buck getting shot in his legs and being arrested and sent to prison while Clyde ran away. However, Clyde was lucky because in Denton, the grand jury ruled that there wasn't enough to convict him since the only evidence that they had against him was that he was a known accomplice of Buck's. But he wasn't off the hook yet because as soon as the decision had been made, Clyde was shipped off to Waco, where he was wanted on 7 different charges, including car theft and possession of stolen goods. And Clyde's 2 best girls, Bonnie and his mother Kumi, got on a train together and followed him to Waco to make sure that he had support at the trial. Now, a married cousin of Bonnie's named Mary, well, this cousin Mary lived in Waco, so they had a place to stay, and although Kumi could only remain there for a day or 2, just long enough for the trial, Bonnie planned to stay for as long as it took. During the trial, it was revealed to Kumi, who had previously thought that Clyde had gone on the straight and narrow after what happened with Buck. Well, she found out that he'd done anything but. In January of 1930, Clyde had gone to Waco and stolen 2 cars, and this time there was more than enough evidence and he was convicted. But since he was technically a first-time offender, the judge went easy on him and only gave him 7 concurrent 2-year sentences with the high probability that he could get out in just 2 years if he behaved himself. There was always an issue with prison overcrowding in Texas, I'm pretty sure there still is, and very few prisoners served their full sentences. Huntsville was also where Clyde's brother Buck was serving his sentence, so they might cross paths on the inside once Clyde was transferred from Waco jail to prison. But the prison brother reunion was not to be. Clyde never made it to Huntsville, and Buck decided to steal a prison guard's car and escape from Huntsville on March 8th, 1930, which I think was just 4 or 5 days after Clyde was sentenced to do time there. But while Clyde was in the Waco jail, Bonnie was able to visit him every day, and she wrote him letters constantly, and she decided to stay in Waco until he was transferred out. And she talked to Clyde about her plans in her letters to him, saying, quote, "Dearest, I'm going to get me a job and stay up here. I couldn't make it in Dallas anymore without you. Sugar, how I wish you were out of all this awful trouble. I don't see how I can get along if you go away. You didn't act like you were very glad to see me today. What's wrong? Don't you love me anymore? I know how you feel, honey. I guess you are awfully worried. P.S. Don't worry, darling, because I'm going to do everything possible. And if you do have to go down, I'll be good while you're gone and be waiting for you. I love you." End quote. So Bonnie had established 2 things in this letter. One, that she was willing to wait as long as it took so that they could be together. So essentially, she wasn't going to date somebody else while he was in prison if he was in prison for a long time. 2, that she was a ride or die kind of chick who would do everything possible to help her soulmate, and Clyde knew just how she could help him. I'm not sure if it was this letter or one right around the same time, but she also wrote to Clyde about how the laws in Waco were much nicer than the ones in Denton. And she's not talking about the actual laws, like don't speed, don't rob a bank, don't take a safe out of an auto body shop and put it into a stolen car. She's not talking about those laws. She's talking about police officers. And according to Emma Parker, this is the first time she can remember Bonnie using this sort of gangster slang, calling policemen laws. So while she's playing the part of Clyde's loyal and down-ass chick, Bonnie's also slowly developing the same attitude towards law enforcement and the establishment, a resentment, a distrust that she never had before, because let's be honest, she really didn't have a reason to have a distrust for the establishment or for police officers before. Nothing had ever happened to her where she'd had a bad run-in with them. But Clyde would talk to her nonstop about how policemen can't be trusted, how they harassed him, how they ruined his life, so obviously this made an impression on her. The fact was, even though Clyde had gotten off easy, only 2 years? I mean, this dude got away with stealing cars and robbing places and stuff like that for a long time. He admittedly said, they're never going to get me. I can just keep doing this and nothing's going to happen to me. But he didn't want to be in prison for 2 years or even 2 days, and he wanted Bonnie's help to get him out. Another man being held in Waco was this career criminal named William Turner, and he was serving 4 years each for 25 counts of burglary, and he also had a desire to escape. Both Clyde and William Turner were well aware that once they were transferred from the Waco jail to an actual prison, escape would be pretty much impossible, although it wasn't really impossible for Buck, right? It was actually really easy for Buck, but That's a completely different story. So they would have to act fast before the transport vehicle came. So William Turner drew Clyde a map of his house where he lived with his mother and sister, and on the map, he marked the location of a gun that he had hidden in his house. On the morning of March 11th, when Bonnie came to visit Clyde, he pressed this map into her hand and he whispered to her what she needed to do. Get to Turner's house, find the gun, and smuggle it back into the jail, but it needed to happen that same day or it would be too late. Clyde promised her that as soon as he was free, he would find a way to send for her and they would never be apart again. And this reminds me very much of, the old Crossroads legend. Bonnie was sitting at a fork in the road. She had a choice to make. Which path would she venture down? Did she refuse to help Clyde and risk losing the man she loved? Or did she say yes and become complicit in a crime that could basically put her behind bars as well if she got caught? I do think that this is the moment that Bonnie decided she was willing to go down whatever path he wanted her to go down. And in a way, she sort of did make a deal with the devil. Bonnie said yes, understanding the risk completely and being thrilled by this risk. She thought the jailbreak plan was the most romantic thing that had ever happened to her, and her new life with Clyde would be that something, right, that she'd been waiting for and asking her diary when it would happen. This shared act of criminality would tie them together forever. And when she opened up the map outside of the jail and saw that Clyde had written, "You are the sweetest baby in the world to me. I love you," on the map, the butterflies were flying in her stomach. Her heart was beating all fast. She got flushed in her cheeks and she knew she'd made the right decision. Bonnie and her cousin Mary drove over to William Turner's house, but Mary had no idea what they were there to do. Bonnie had just told her, I need to pick something up from this house. And it wasn't until they were parked outside the house that Bonnie was like, okay, check it. So I'm here to steal a gun from these people's house who aren't home and don't know I'm going into their house. And then I'm going to take that gun and I'm going to smuggle it into the jail so that Clyde can escape from the jail and we can go on the run together. And Mary was terrified. In the book Fugitives, Mary said, quote, "I never was so scared in my whole life. My feet were like ice and my knees were like water. I just knew policemen were all around the house waiting to pounce on us when we came out. I begged Bonnie to leave, but she said no, sir, she wasn't budging till she found that gun. When I saw that she was determined, I started in to help her hunt, for it seemed the quickest way to get away from there. In the end, we turned the house topsy-turvy before we found it in the window seat, and the place was such an unholy mess that there was a big story in the papers next day about it being ransacked, but nothing was said about the missing gun because the Turners didn't know it was there." End quote. So I guess the gun wasn't where William Turner had marked it to be on the map, so Bonnie and Mary basically ripped this house apart to find it, and then they just left, And the Turners probably came home later that day, and they were like, what the heck? Someone did all this, but they didn't take one thing? Bonnie and Mary drove back to Waco. They were going right to the jail because there was no time to waste. In order to hide the gun so she could get it inside, Bonnie put on two belts, one under her dress to hold her slip tight and another one over her dress, where it would normally be. Using the tension of these two belts, she created sort of like a pocket down her shirt, and then she was able to slip the gun down the front of her dress, and it would be held in this little pocket. And you couldn't see it from, just looking at her, and it wasn't going to fall out because she had this contraption. I mean, for being new at this, jailbreak game, she was pretty industrious with it. And as far as getting to the jail and, getting inside, she wasn't too concerned with being patted down since she visited Clyde every day. The guards knew her on sight, and, after the first couple of times of her showing up every day, they just stopped checking her for things. But when they arrived, Bonnie was told that she'd already been there once that day to see Clyde, so she'd have to come back tomorrow, which wasn't going to work because Clyde had explicitly told her it needed to happen that day. So Bonnie batted her eyelashes and probably used that Marilyn Monroe voice, the one where she sounds like she's 6 years old, the one that men seemed to love back in the day for some reason. So gross. Anyways, they ended up letting her in. And she passed the gun to Clyde, and it was easy. Clyde was a non-violent first-time offender. No one was paying him any attention. The police officers on duty probably did more looking away than anything, so Clyde could steal a few extra kisses from his pretty young sweetheart. On top of that, no one thought Clyde, in his position, facing such a light sentence, would be stupid enough to stage a jailbreak. But they were wrong. He was, in fact, that stupid. Okay, so there's 3 guys involved with this jailbreak. Clyde himself, William Turner, the gun guy, and then this other guy named Emery Abernathy. And they all had cells on the 2nd floor of the jail, and their cells were like adjacent to each other. So on this evening, after all the regular day police officers had gone home, there was only 2 officers left to guard the prisoners overnight. So William Turner called down, because this is like an open sort of area, like the bottom floor, but then the prison cells are almost like on a loft, so you can see down. And William Turner called down, and he was like, my stomach hurts. I feel like I'm going to throw up. Can you bring me a glass of milk to help settle my stomach? Because when I'm nauseous, there's nothing I want more than a glass of milk. So one of the guards, whose name was Stanford, he brought the milk up, while the other guard, whose name was Jones, remained in the downstairs office doing paperwork. And as soon as Stanford got up there, Abernathy, who had the gun, he pointed at him and he was like, give us the keys to the cell, which, Stanford did. They unlocked themselves, and then they locked Stanford up in one of the cells. And then they went downstairs, where they encountered Jones, still doing paperwork in his office. Now, they could have just taken him out, right? They had a gun. They could have even tied him to his chair, but they didn't do that. They told Jones to sit still, not move, and be quiet for 5 minutes. And since they were like the worst criminals ever, they didn't even take his gun. Like, they didn't disarm him when they left. And of course, Jones didn't sit quietly for 5 minutes. Can you imagine him telling that story the next morning over coffee to all the other cops? How'd those 3 guys escape, Jonesy? Well, fellas, they told me to sit quietly and not move a muscle for 5 minutes, so that's what I did. Sure did. So as soon as the 3 prisoners had run outside, Jones got right up. He ran out with his gun drawn into the street behind them, but it was nighttime, so it was dark. And he couldn't really see. He could just see figures running away. And he shot at them a couple times, which seems super irresponsible, because what if somebody else was in the road? But the 3 prisoners were gone with the wind. He didn't hit them. He didn't catch them. And by the time the other police showed up a couple of minutes later, they'd already had a little bit of a head start. A few blocks away, Clyde hotwired a car, and then they drove to the north end of town, where they abandoned that car before stealing another one. Now, this second car belonged to a Dr. William Souther. Well, I shouldn't say it belonged to him. He'd borrowed it from a friend, and when he walked outside that evening at about 8 p.m., he noticed that his car wasn't there anymore, but he just assumed that the owner had come and picked it up, so he didn't report it missing. And this little streak of luck allowed Clyde and his associates to speed away undetected pretty much for 12 hours. While the cops were putting out APBs and bulletins and stuff for the first stolen car, the second one wouldn't be reported missing until the next morning. And this wasn't some streak of genius on behalf of Clyde, Turner, and Abernathy. They had no way to know that this second car wouldn't be reported stolen. They had just liked it more than the first one. And they didn't end up even driving it that long because, they felt that they had to keep on the move and, give it a couple hours or maybe a day or so and then steal a new car. So by the time the old one was reported stolen, they were in a new one and they couldn't be found. So over the next couple of days, multiple stolen vehicle reports started coming in, and this created a sort of vector map for the Waco PD, and they were able to track the escaped prisoners as they went further west. Now, if you look at Bonnie and Clyde and the crazy situations they would go on to get themselves into, you can tell neither one of them was cut out or prepared for a life of crime. They just weren't really any good at it. They liked the romance and the intrigue of it all, what they saw in the movies, but when it came down to the less fun aspects, the dirtier aspects, like actually planning and executing something properly, it just wasn't their strong suit. They didn't seem to think anything through or consider the repercussions, which I think can be pretty typical of teenagers and even some young adults, even some adults, which is exactly why teenagers and young people should not be bank robbers, because they're just too impulsive. And another thing is, these young people, these impulsive young people, when they get together, and I see it all the time in these cases we cover, they sort of build each other up too much. You know what I mean? So they're all sitting around concocting some half-baked plan, and there's no one there. There's no responsible person there to say, this is dumb, or this isn't going to work. Instead, you just got a handful of these spontaneous, short-term thinking kids who are, bolstering each other. And they're like, oh, yeah, this is the best plan ever, guys. Nothing could possibly go wrong. We are geniuses. Now, the papers basically took the story of the jailbreak and pretty much roasted Clyde and his buddies. They called them baby dumbbells, pretty much saying the stuff I just said, but not as nicely. A headline from that day read, "Schoolboy Barrow, Willie Turner, and Emery Abernathy are at large this morning, but they'll be back. They haven't the brains to stay free. It's the dumbbell in them that brings them back." I mean, even a broken clock is right twice a day, which means sometimes the papers get it right too. And in this situation, they were correct because Clyde would be back. And that's where we're going to end part 2. This is going to be in probably 2 more parts. I'm not going to even say it anymore. This is exactly what happened with my Manson series. It was supposed to be 3 parts. I just kept finding out more as I went along. It was such an interesting story for me. I wanted to share it with you guys because I was so interested in it. So I wanted to tell everyone so that you could be interested too. And all these little details that really flesh people out and make them 3-dimensional. And I really enjoyed that. So these will probably be at least 4 parts. I don't know. I'm not going to say, because then I'll just set myself up to be lying, and I don't want to lie. So I don't know how many parts it's going to be. It's going to be what it's going to be. But I'm also working on a Scott Peterson video. There's like almost 300 pages of this writ of habeas corpus paperwork that I've been reading, and I gotta tell you, it's crazy, the things that I found out, and I want to make a video about it because I know I did make a series on Scott Peterson and Lacey Peterson and Connor Peterson, but there was so much we didn't know. And that's all I'll say. So I'm working on that as well. And there's a couple other videos I'm working on. So don't worry, if you're not interested in this series, although I wish you would be, and I wish you would give it a chance and just spend time with me. But even if you're not interested and you don't have the time to listen to me talk to you about something you're not interested in, there will be things coming for you. So just stay tuned and hang with us. Thank you guys so much for being here. Don't forget to follow me on social media, Instagram and Twitter. Don't forget to like this video if you liked it. Share it if you think it's worth sharing. Subscribe if you haven't already. And make sure you are still subscribed if you were subscribed before, because YouTube unsubscribes people from my channel all the time. Also, don't forget to subscribe to my podcast that I co-host with Derek Levasseur, who's a retired police detective. He also used to be on Breaking Homicide on the ID channel, before COVID. But I co-host that with him, and we put out new episodes every Friday. Also, I'll probably be going live sometime within this next week. I want to talk about the Elisa Lam documentary on Netflix. I want to discuss that. I also have some subscriber mail that I've been waiting to go live to open, so I can't wait to do that and to just chat with you guys. So keep an eye out in my community page post. Just keep an eye out for our community post, because if I do go live, I'll give you guys a heads up. Thank you so much for being here. Stay kind, stay beautiful, and I'll see you very soon.